Welcome, everyone, to our Kingdom Heirs book club. We are still reading Investing in Duplexes, Triplex, and Quads. We're almost to the end. We only have 3 more chapters left after tonight. We're on chapters 11 and 12, which is talking about closing costs and also property managing. And so this may be a part 1 and 2. I'm not sure. Or maybe I'll do an online class if that's something that you're interested in. Definitely comment below and we'll do a complete overall class on the property management portion of it. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So tonight's discussion is going to be about closing, lease agreements, and property management. So if you've been following this book thus far, which I highly recommend, excuse me, I highly recommend this book if you're interested in purchasing, whether you're already an investor, but you're seeking to buy multiple dwellings. This is a great book. I'm really enjoying it. Actually, I walked away with some great nuggets from the book. So if this is something that you're interested in, he will walk you through. And so the whole process. So if you are going through the steps at this point, you're now at your closing. Congratulations. I'm telling you, just the excitement and when you're purchasing property for the first time or second time, third time, sometimes it's nerve-wracking. It really is nerve-wracking. And so when you get to the closing table, you know, you're at the last stretch. This is the last thing that you have to do. And all you have to do is sign the paperwork. And before you get to the table, let's look at some key things. To have in mind. So you want to select a closing agent. And if you're working with a realtor, that's something that the realtor will take care of for you. So you don't have to worry much about that. Make sure your financing is in order, meaning there's the down payment that you had, but there are some closing fees. And so I'm not going to go over all the closing fees. It does cover that in the chapter. So you, if you haven't already read it, you know, just go through that again, and it explains all the fees associated at a closing, but it could be a couple of $1,000s, more than a couple of $1,000s at the end. And if you weren't, if it hasn't already been negotiated that the seller would pay your closing costs, you want to be prepared, because will a deal fall through if you're not prepared? If your financing is not in order? Yes, it can definitely fall through. So keep that in mind. Check out your closing costs. So your realtor should provide you with a somewhat of an estimate of what your closing costs should look like. You want to get a survey and inspections. You want to review contract and dates. Let's say that, you know, through your inspections, you found out that there's some things that are not right that needed to be corrected, and you had to go back to the seller to negotiate those repairs. You want to make sure that those things are intact. You want to make sure that, you know, you're going to get a stack of paperwork, and you want to take your time and read through your contract. You don't want to, because sometimes they can slip some things in there that you were unaware of. And so this is the time to definitely go through that and find any discrepancies. You want to perform a title search and title insurance. definitely by this time you should have, you're just really going back and just making sure everything is in order. You want to make sure that the seller that is selling you the home is actually the name on the title. You want to make sure that everything is in order. And then if this is your first time home and you're buying that 4-unit, you can definitely get homeowners insurance. And I'm sorry, I'm making sure I'm not mistaking that for, I'm thinking of a warranty, but yes, you want to have home insurance on your new home, because you don't want any problems there. Let me make sure. Let's see. You can tell I'm not tech savvy. Sorry about that, you guys. And then you want to take a final walkthrough. You want to make sure that, again, things that you had to go back and because once you do your walkthrough, there you may have created a list of things that needed to be repaired. So you want to take a final walkthrough. You want to make sure that everything that you thought you were getting or thought needed repairs, that is taken care of through your final walkthrough. Now let's talk about the lease. Outside of, if you're going to be a landlord, this part is so important. A lease is a legally binding contractual agreement between landlord and tenant for the occupancy of a rental unit. A good lease stipulates all terms and conditions of the landlord-tenant relationship. This is so important. And so again, the book gives you an example of a lease. And so you want to be detailed in your lease, like for instance, who's going to cut the grass, whether it's the landlord or if the tenant. So if the tenant's responsible, are you going to provide the lawnmower? You want to be detailed on all of that. For instance, I had a property where there was a washer and dryer. I didn't need a washer and dryer, but it was included in with the lease, but the tenants understood that I wasn't going to be responsible for the repairs. So you want to be detailed there. You want to be detailed on whether or not you allow pets, because my last tenant had almost like a zoo. I mean, they had fish, they had dogs, they had birds, and a property manager handles that property, but even to the point that they got concerned, like, okay, I think they are overdoing it with the pets. We did charge a pet security. We do charge monthly fees for a pet. So this next time we decided not to, because after the tenant moved out, there was a smell, and it's hard to get rid of that. You're paying extra money to cover up. And if the pets have lice or, you just want to, or fleas, you want to make sure that could be a headache down the road. So you definitely want to include all of that into the lease. Now, let's just start with an application. I do have an application. You can charge a fee for the application, and with the application fee, you can include the costs of having to check their credit, check their criminal records. That could be the fee that you collect, that you get up front. So that way, if they don't pan out, at least you're not out of pocket for anything. And And then the lease, for the lease, I do charge 1 month in advance, and I hold that for security. And that's for protection, just in case, something happens in the lease. At least you have something to fall back on, something to add to any damages. And so I have a video for you. Now, I took the Rich Dad Real Estate course, and so this author and book was part of my educational package. And so they are a property management team. And so you definitely can, it's great to have property managers. When I first started, I did my own property management. But now, after about 5 years, I did it for about 5 years, I do pay a property management team to come in and take care of my property. So let me go ahead and this is about 12 minutes long.
Hey there, what if I told you that this is your chance to ace the skill of the future? Yes, with 58 million new jobs by 2022.
Okay, guys, so this is about landlord basics. So many of you have written in and asked these questions about, some of the things that I've been in the property management business for about 30 years, and we have a very large property management company that manages all of our properties. So we manage self-storage, commercial, apartments, vacant land, new construction, you name it. We've been around the real estate business a long time. So these are 6 landlord basics that you just cannot afford not to know. And if you find any value in these videos, just hit subscribe and like, because other people just like you are trying to find good information out there on YouTube. So thank you. Number 1, remember, this is a business. So this is not a stock. It's not something that you can just invest in and walk away from. This is a full-on business. This has income and it has expense. Your tenants are your clients. They are not necessarily your friends. Now, it's good to be friendly, but you need to be able to treat them more like clients. And the lease is the contract between the two of you. You need to know that there's going to be difficult conversations coming up. This is your money or it's somebody else's money that's invested. And you guys are going to be looking for some kind of a return. So there's rent collection and management of the expenses and real bookkeeping. And that financial statement or that income statement is your report card. Don't forget. Number 2, be super clear on your policies and procedures. So in our properties, we always have a separate document of policies and procedures around clubhouse use, around the pool use, around loud music, around parking, around all kinds of things that are going to happen at your property or inside of your community. You're going to have things in there like who takes care of the landscape? Is it the tenant or is it you? Can they have pets? And if they do, then you need another pet policy. And that pet policy will outline things like sizes, the numbers, the breeds, all those kinds of things need to be inside of that new policy. But that's certainly a policy. What about smoking? What about smoking inside of the unit? I know for a fact that we've had plenty of smokers in our units, and afterwards, those are some of the toughest units to clean because of the residue on the walls, et cetera, et cetera. And so do you have enough money to be able to cover those kinds of repairs after they move out? How many cars do they have? I know we had a property in Flagstaff, Arizona that was near a university, and each 2-bedroom unit sometimes had 4 kids in them, and each kid had a car. So you have 4 cars for one apartment. All you have to do is the math to know that there's not enough parking for something like that. So cars can be a big thing in many, many locations, especially where there's limited parking like downtown in some urban areas and things like that. So make sure that you have the make, model, license plate number, and all those things. And in some cases, even stickers for their cars, so that you know exactly who's parking where and when. Can they park their work van or their truck at your community, or maybe trailers or boats or those kinds of things? Those are usually extra parking, and they can take up a lot of your open spaces, which then restrict the parking for your guests. These are all things that need to be inside of your policies and procedures. Who's going to pay for the electric, the water, the sewer, the trash? Is it you? Is it the tenant? On some master metered buildings, it might be the landlord. On some non-master metered buildings, it might be the tenant. That needs to be all clear inside of your policies and procedures, and even sometimes inside of your leases. Sometimes new landlords forget all these small little details, and when they come up later, it's very, very difficult to enforce these things because they're not in your policies and procedures that are signed, and they're not in your lease that is signed. Number 3, if you put it into your lease, be ready to enforce it. Remember, you have to perform and enforce the contract. So the areas of dispute around leases are typically the following. Things like rent, when is it due? Things like the late fee, which a lot of times you need to enforce. If you don't enforce the late fee, then you're basically setting the precedence for the resident to pay late each and every month. You need to enforce that late fee. If they pay you with a check and it bounces, it's called an NSF, or non-sufficient funds. You need to be aware of the fees that the bank may charge you in addition to the late fee that the resident might owe, and those have to be enforced. During the lease, you're going to see all kinds of crazy things. You're going to see roommates come and go. You're going to see subletting. You're going to see new pets. You're going to see new cars. You're going to see boats, trailers. You're going to see damage. You're going to see all kinds of things. These things are all in your lease. They need to be enforced, and you need to take care of them immediately, especially if you have other tenants in the community, because sometimes residents can be disruptive and chase off a lot of your good tenants. So make sure that you're enforcing things inside of your lease and you're taking care of them right away. So if you put it into the lease, make sure that you guys enforce it. The 4th thing, the security deposit. By far, the security deposit is the most misunderstood and the biggest issue, especially when people move in and when people move out. What I always suggest that you do is fill out a move-in form, which you can find on kenmcelroy.com under forms. And this form needs to be very, very detailed and specific. So just like when you guys have got a rental car and you walk around the car, you take a look at all the little things that the car might have on it because you don't want to be charged when you return that car. The same is true for an apartment or a rental. You want to make sure that the landlord and the tenant sign off on a move-in form so that everything's disclosed. Let's say there's a cigarette burn in the countertop, that it's on there, or there's a nick in the bathtub, for example, that was not repaired, and it's on there, so that you as the tenant are not charged by the landlord, and that the landlord also knows that you as the tenant did not do the damage. This is a very, very important form, especially as it pertains to when you're trying to get your deposit back or when the landlord's trying to give you your deposit back. I always suggest on a move out that the landlord or the manager always takes lots of photos. Take photos of everything that you're going to charge that tenant for, whether it's the cleaning or the maintenance or any kind of repairs, because it's very, very, very important, not only written documentation, but photo documentation, because I guarantee you that the tenant is going to have a very different viewpoint with you as the landlord or the manager on what you need to do in order to get that unit rent ready for the next tenant for move-in. You guys are going to have very different opinions on this, and the difference is typically going to be taken out of the deposit in order to fix those kinds of things so that you can re-rent the unit. And so you guys are going to have issues around the carpet repairs or the carpet cleaning or the unit paint or all those kinds of things, all these little things that a tenant may not see that you see immediately that you're going to need to do. And don't forget, when a tenant moves out, by law, every state is a little bit different. You have to notify them in writing of exactly the detail of what you're going to do if you're going to hold any portion of their deposit. And by law, in most states, you have to have their deposits back to them somewhere between 14 and 30 days, depending on the state. So be very aware of that. So right when they move out, you need to go into the unit. You need to make sure that you do your inspections. You need to make sure you do all the itemization of everything that you need done. And you need to try to get all that work done in that short period of time. So it's part of that documentation when you send it out to the tenant and say, these are the things that we had to charge you from your security deposit, and here's the balance. And they're going to be typically upset at the balance amount, but you need to have all that documentation. It'll mitigate a lot of dispute later. Trust me on this. Make sure that part of your fees are non-refundable so that they can cover things like cleaning, painting, and carpet cleaning on move out. There's no such thing as a non-refundable deposit. Think of that. A deposit is a deposit. You have a non-refundable fee and a deposit. And so make sure those are super clear and your tenant understands what those are being used for at the beginning, during the middle, or at the end. Number 5, run a proper criminal and credit background check. So a lot of times landlords just want somebody to move in. This is a mistake that a lot of landlords and managers do because they have pressure on vacancy. They want to get somebody in there right away. And so they say, yeah, somebody shows up, writes a big check, has lots of cash, gives them the cash. And the next thing they know, they have a nightmare on their hands. So the minute that you tell a resident that you're going to run a criminal background check, which by the way, they pay you for, they're going to pay you, say, $50 for you to run their credit. No different than if you're buying a car or you're buying a house and they run your credit. It's the exact same process. You're trying to make sure that you're finding out everything about them and that they have the ability to pay and they don't have a lot of outstanding debt. And even if they do, that's okay. You can still work on those things, but you need to know and you need to have that conversation. And those can turn into things like extra deposits or extra rent, etc. There are plenty of rental screening websites out there, so just go find a good one. And don't forget, the resident pays you to run their own credit. So I don't know why you would skip this very, very important step. I always say trust, but verify. The 6th thing and the last thing is fix what's broken. Now, this might seem rather obvious. If you want quality tenants, you have to be a quality landlord, period. If something is broken, fix it ASAP. If your resident calls you, you need to fix it right away and let them know when it's going to be fixed. You need to have a handyman on speed dial that can take care of residents' needs immediately. When you do this, the resident will be happy. They'll see that you're responsive. And when you come to the end of your lease, they're probably going to renew because you were a good, responsible landlord taking care of their needs along the way. Remember, they're paying you rent and you have an obligation to them too. Of course, you got to make sure that the problem is legit. And in many cases, you might even be able to do it yourself or talk them through it over the phone. But that's just good customer service. The one thing that I would highly recommend is that you never let a tenant do their own work, do their own paint. It's your place. You need to control all of that. Unless, of course, they're like a licensed plumber or a licensed electrician and they can do some of the work themselves. But even then, I would find out exactly what it is they're going to do, get it in writing so you have it in your paperwork and you have it in your documentation. I did this on one of my rentals where I had a very, very good tenant that was a licensed plumber. He wanted to install a water softener. I had him write it up, bid it up. I had him go get the water softener at Home Depot. He installed it himself and I knocked off $100 off of his rent. That's a win-win. So if you follow these 6 landlord basics, you will be well on your way to being a successful landlord. And thanks for listening.
That was good information, I tell you.
Should we build an
And
Amazon
along the
business
way,
for
you do,
If a team of seasoned Amazon
you get busy, you try to cut corners, and I'm telling you, you do pay for it along the way. And I'm telling you, I've been in business now since 2008. And, I've made some mistakes along the way, but I just use them as a learning tool. And so one of the key things that he mentioned is that this is a business. And so you want, no matter how many properties you have, you want to run it as if you own 20, 40 units. It doesn't matter how big or small your portfolio is, but you want to start off as a business, you want to do everything, you're not going to be 100% perfect, but you want to set up everything in the right way. So it will serve as protection down the way. So that's the key thing. This is a business. So for each property that I have, it's in an LLC, its own LLC. So each property is its own entity, and I run it accordingly. And like I said, at the beginning, I used to do the property management. Now I have a company that does it for me. So they deal with the tenant. They have their own leasing agreement. You definitely want to be clear as mud, so that way down the road, there won't be any issues with, any misunderstandings, because that could get ugly. I'm telling you, and I'm sorry, everything is connected, so it's ringing. And so my iPad is now going off. But yeah, I'm telling you from experience, I did have a tenant that did a lot of work on his own. Matter of fact, I have a condo, and downstairs it was like a half bathroom, and he converted it to a full bathroom, and that he did a very good professional job. But I also heard horror stories where, the landlord made a deal with the tenant, like, well, hey, I want a discount or whatever, I'll do my own painting. And the lady was only about, I'm 5'2", so I'm kind of short. But even being 5'2", to reach from the floor to the ceiling, she only painted as high as she could reach with her arm. And so the top portion of the wall was not painted. So, there's horror stories there. But, after, some time, you just sit back and laugh, and you learn from that experience to do the work yourself, or hire somebody to go in to do the work for you. He definitely has some great points, even takeaways for me. Like, I read his book years ago. And again, the book is the ABCs of Property Management. And that gave me a foundation that I needed to do it on my own. But once you do it a couple of times, it becomes very simple and easy. It's not hard to find tenants, especially if you have, you heard the phrase real estate, you want location, location, location. So if you find areas, working class areas, all I've ever have done for advertisement is put a for rent sign in the window. And I mean, my properties don't sit long. Usually it's already rented before the old tenant moves out. I've been blessed to have long-term tenants. I've had the one particular guy I was telling you about, him and his family lived there for 8 years. That's a long time. And because he did things like, remodeling the bathroom, I didn't go up on his rent, which, I don't advise that, but, you have to, if you have a good tenant, they pay on time. I mean, he never was late. When they pay on time, I mean, that is, I'm telling you, especially if you have a mortgage on the property, that means that that's money out of your pocket so that your bills get paid on time. And if your tenant's paying late, like he says, you want to be clear, like if you pay late, usually I give my tenants a 10-day grace period. So the rent is due on the 1st, they have until the 10th to pay. But if they pay after the 10th, then my mortgage company is charging me late fees. Like I have a condo, so that means the condo association is charging me late fees, $25. The bank is charging me late fees. Those fees accumulate. And so you want to definitely put all that in there. Like, okay, if you're late, this is what your fees are going to be, because these are fees that you're going to incur along the way. And also, I agree with him. When my tenants have an issue, I do not put a Band-Aid. I will replace it, because then I know that I'm not going to get a call for that in a while. And say, like, if I replace a a brand new refrigerator, and then 4 months later that tenant moves out and a new tenant moves in. And if they're complaining about the refrigerator, I'm going to disagree, because look, I just put a brand new refrigerator in there 4 months ago. So, you know, you'll know when, and especially like if you purchase the 4-unit, and that's your first time home buyer and you move into the unit, you know what's wrong with the place, you know, so you won't have a tenant come along that has damaged your property and is trying to say, hey, there's a repair that needs to be done. You're like, oh no, I live there. Become familiar with your properties. So that way, you know, when it's negligence and when it's legitimate repairs on the property. And again, if you're watching the replay, and if you have any questions or any inputs there, or you want to share a story of a tenant story, if you're a landlord and you have tenants and you want to share a success story or a horrifying story, definitely share it in the comments. And if you had good, excellent tenants, you know, share that as well, because, you know, we learn from each other. And that's why it's important to be a part of a group of real estate investors, because you're going to hear some things that you may not have experienced with. You know, you may have had 3 good tenants, and then, you know, you hear their story and you sit back, well, I don't have that problem. But then your 4th tenant gives you that problem, and then you know how to, you'll know how to, you know, be involved and take care of that. So these are 6 steps to managing your property. And I do apologize. I see spelling errors in here. And so I do apologize. But number 1, run a background check. And that's something he said in the video. And you'll probably hear some repeat items, because he sits on the Rich Dad team. He's one of the advisors. And so he handles their property management for their company. Know the documents you'll need. So for instance, I own a condo and there's a condo association. So, so they need to know the days that the trash has to be out. They need to know things like, well, the trash can, once the garbage is picked up, you got to put it back in the area. There's certain areas that the trash can is allowed to be in. Also, like you can't just plant flowers, you have to get permission for certain things. You have to have certain blinds up to the windows. So when you're in a community that has rules and regulations, you want to make sure that you cover those with your tenant, because, for instance, I know that my condo association charges fees. And so again, those are fees that the tenant will pay if they're not abiding by the rules. And so it's only fair that they know that up front, versus, you getting billed and then you go and they say, well, I didn't know anything about that. You didn't, bring that to my attention. Now you're paying for what your tenant is doing. So you want to have know the documents that you'll need when you move that tenant in. You also want to go to look up the tenant's rights. And that's at a .gov website. You just type in tenants' rights in your state. So you want to find out what your rights are as a landlord, and you want to know the rights of your tenants. So that way there's no misunderstanding on both parts. Stay up to date on the landlord and tenancy laws. That's going and finding out the landlord rights and the tenant's rights. You want to maintain the property, because it's best to maintain it versus a tenant moves out and then you have, like, for instance, my 8-year tenant, if I didn't maintain it, then 8 years later, imagine 8 years of maintenance accumulating. That could be very costly. You want to be able to turn that apartment around as quickly as you can. As soon as that tenant moves out, it's in there. If they clean the carpets, of course, you know, you definitely can expect to get in there and have to paint. But if you have to change carpet, if you have to repair holes in the walls, update plumbing and electrical, you know, you may be down longer than necessary. And then when there's no tenant in there, there's no income coming in. And so you want to keep that in mind. You want to know your market and competition in your area. You know, you want to definitely keep up with what the rents are for that size apartment. You want to know, like, you know, go around and look at some of the apartments, and you'll see that they're much smaller, they're more expensive. They offer things like movie rooms, theater rooms, exercise rooms. You know, those are things that you're in competition with. But again, your demographic, you can be looking for families versus like a single professional, you know, so you can kind of see what, and then too, go to some of the, they have Parade of Homes just to see what they're offering and updates for kitchens and bathrooms, because those are areas that people look for when they're looking for rent. Most of mine are family homes. And so, you know, you want to make sure that, like, so stainless steels, you know, just updating the appliances could definitely increase your rents over time. And so you want to keep up with that. You want to give incentives, like, for instance, like a tenant moves in, you know, you may have a gift basket that you provide. Thank you for being our tenant. And if they faithfully pay their rent for 12 months straight, send them a gift card, a gas card, or something saying thank you so much. And then if you had already planned, like, you know what, I think I'll put ceiling fans in the apartments, then you say, you can add that as an incentive gift. Hey, you know what, thank you for being a great tenant. Let me put in a ceiling fan, and then allow them to pick it out. You know, it's just the little things that tenants feel connected. And again, like I said, I've always so far, for the most part, had long-term tenants. And so I take pride in that. You know, I take pride in that, because if a tenant is constantly moving in and out every year, that's money out of your pocket. And eventually you can, you know, you don't want to be in a negative cash flow at the end of the year, every year. So those are things to think about. And so that concludes, you know, chapters 11 and 12. Next week, we're going to do 3 chapters. We're going to do 13, 14, and 15. And that will bring us to the end of the book. And again, if you're wanting, it's a great resource source book. It's a great how-to book. So I highly recommend it. And then, you know, it's the same process that you go through to buy single family. It's the same to buy 2, 3, and 4 doors. And wouldn't it be nice to get 4 checks? And again, if you move in on that 4 unit, live there for a year, repeat it again, get another 4 unit, move into that, get the low interest rates, get an FHA loan for the second place as well. And then what we've learned in the book is to move into one, update that unit so you can increase the rents, because that's your goal, is to increase the rents, and then do some updates on the other places. And then now you're getting 8 checks. You have 8 doors in the amount of time that you would take to buy 2 doors. So Thank you for joining me. My name is Renee, your wealth coach. Bye for now.